This is the Business Storytelling Show, a top global marketing podcast listened to in more than 100 countries, live streamed on social media, and broadcast on DBTV. Christoph Trapp chats with industry leaders to help your company tell better business stories. Here's today's episode.
Hey, business storytellers. How's everyone doing? Today, we want to talk about taking the leap to self-employment, episode 702 of the Business Storytelling Show. Really glad to see everyone coming back and talking about another story on another topic that probably needs business storytelling, right, to make it work. Because if you're a solopreneur, you do have to do marketing and sales and, bring people in and keep them in. So today I'm talking to the author of Succeeding as a Solopreneur. You can scan that code. It's going to stay up there the whole time while we're talking about the topic to find out what does it take, what plan should you have, and who can make it work and who can't. So let's find out. Liz Steblay, she is the author of Succeed as a Solopreneur, and she's joining me today. Liz, nice to see you.
Happy to be here.
You got that fist bump down to a science. Boom. We're getting this show going. So really appreciate you coming on the show. But kind of tell me the passion that you have to talk about this topic and helping people. And certainly people need help, right? To make that jump is my guess.
Yes, people need a lot of help to make the jump. And even once they have taken the leap to being self-employed, they continue to be plagued by what I call FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I've actually nicknamed this the FUD monster. That's the little creature that nibbles nonsense into your brain. Like, who are you to step out on your own? You don't know anything about marketing. You don't know how to price your services. You don't know how to negotiate a contract. So everybody deals with FUD, particularly if you're about to take the leap to being self-employed, or like me, if you've been self-employed for 20 years, I still get FUD from time to time. It never fully goes away.
You know what I find interesting too is, you kind of have to do everything. I know at some point you can outsource things, like on my side hustles, I got an accountant and this person and that person helping me. But at the beginning, you kind of have to dip your toes in everything, right? To an extent, even if you need to understand it or whatnot. But how do you, and then I see some people who do this, and all of a sudden they went from corporate life to solopreneurism, and all of a sudden they're super loud. Because they just talk nonstop on LinkedIn. So, and I talk nonstop on LinkedIn too, but there is a line somewhere, right? Like you can't just be talking. So how do you find that right line between just talking the talk and being annoying, or actually finding the right mix, the right message, and how do people start there?
Yeah, my cardinal rule is I follow a principle called APV. Sounds a little bit like a venereal disease, but it stands for always provide value. So actually, some people may remember the movie Glengarry Glen Ross, where it was always about always be closing, ABC, always be closing. But when you're self-employed, it's more about APV, always provide value. And that's my gauge for when I feel like I may be too loud or on LinkedIn too much or sending too much information. Like the other day, it was National Entrepreneurs Week, or this is National Entrepreneurs Week when we're recording this. And I was going to post something on LinkedIn, and I thought, how can I turn this into something besides self-promotion? I want to be able to provide value. And if I all day, I couldn't think of any way to tie it to providing value to the person who might be reading it. So I didn't post. And then finally in the evening, a light bulb went off. I'm like, oh, actually, I can talk about this little piece of the book, and that will provide value. So that's my filter, is always provide value. I don't just post things that aren't going to provide any value just for the sake of self-promotion. So that's a good way to monitor whether or not you might be too loud.
The other thing that I find interesting is providing value. To me, that screams you have to know your audience, right? Who are you trying to reach? And there's a lot of new entrepreneurs. I hear them on podcasts and I hear them talk about their company. And when they're asked who couldn't work with you, they say, anybody, everybody. And before you answer my question, though, I want to remind everyone really quickly, we are live streaming on Amazon today because Liz's book is, of course, on Amazon. So if you're watching there, really appreciate you being here. Make sure you follow if you don't follow me already. We do live stream here when there's an author on the show or somebody who has a product. Everything around me, fake plants, the sound panels, you can actually buy down below on Amazon. And even the center cam or Plex, I don't know the right name. I'm probably saying a competitor, but the eye level cam right there is there as well. Okay, back to Liz. So how do people figure out who their actual audience is? Because it can't be everyone, right? Or can it?
Well, you're entirely correct, Christoph, and that a lot of people take the leap into being self-employed, either as an independent consultant, a financial planner, an executive coach or something, and they think that they need to be available for lots of different types of work. They want to be a jack of all trades or a Jill of all skills. But actually, the reverse is true. Because if you put yourself in your prospective client's shoes, they don't want to hire a jack of all trades. They want to hire somebody who's an expert. They want to hire the person who specializes in this particular problem or situation. And this is one of the hardest things people have to deal with or figure out when they make the leap to being self-employed, is how do you narrow your niche and be known for something? I call it developing the tip of your spear. Sure, you can do lots of things, but what's going to make you memorable? What's going to make you referable? What's going to make you pop into people's mind when they hear the certain key phrase or words? So, for example, when I first fell into being self-employed back in 2004, 20 years ago, I specialized in doing organizational change management on big, hairy tech projects like implementing PeopleSoft back in the day, or SAP or Oracle, and globally for global companies. So these were big, hairy projects. And I kept getting referred back to one client over and over and over again. And they'd reach out to me and they say, Sally McDonald says I should talk to you. So I reached out to Sally, who was one of my first clients. And I said, Sally, I appreciate this, but just out of curiosity, what is it that causes you to refer me to these people? And she says, oh, it's easy. Whenever I hear the words big, hairy change, I tell them they need to have at least one conversation with you. So this is what people struggle with, Christoph, is how do they figure out what those key words are? And there's a whole chapter, actually a whole key of the 6 keys in my book that gets down to that. You need to narrow your niche and be known for something. That's what gets repeat business, and that's what generates referrals.
You know, what I find interesting about, I totally agree, you have to narrow it, but I also find it interesting when you're too narrow. I mean, I'm just thinking about the people, they're the CEO of a company that makes a little bitty widget of some kind. And yes, it makes millions and whatever, but all they ever do and talk about is that little bitty widget. Like, I mean, even if they like money and, whatever, like at some point you have to be a little passionate about the widget, right? I mean, how do you do it? How do you know you're narrow enough, but not so narrow that all you talk about is one little bitty thing? Or maybe people can deal with that. I don't know. I would like something a little wider, but not super wide, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's tricky. And I think the easiest way is to get feedback from people. I often counsel solopreneurs in my weekly office hours to reach out to 5 people you know and trust and ask them their opinion. And there's 2 advantages to that. One is it's a chance to have a conversation and reconnect with somebody that you know and trust. I call it the flattery approach because you're asking for their opinion. And the other is to actually get their opinion and listen to what they have to say. Like they might say, well, if you're just focusing on this, steps A, B, and C, it might be too narrow. Or, yeah, that might only come up for us in my company once every 5 years. What if you presented yourself as A, B, C, D, and E, or whatever? But get their feedback and ask for their input, because it's a little bit, that expression, seeing the forest for the trees. When you're in it and you're in your business and your expertise, it's very hard to step back and look at it from a different angle. So you need input from other people.
Well, and you also need to figure out the words that people use, right?
Yes.
I mean, if you say the big, hairy problem or project or whatever, and people literally use that phrase, I mean, that's going to help you stand out. And if you use the wrong phrase, people can't even find you, or like just because that's what you call it. I mean, this is not really a business idea or whatever, but back in the day, I called audiogram something different, and I wrote about it. I couldn't figure out that they were called audiograms until Max Branstetter said, Christoph, those are audiograms. Of course, everybody searches for audiograms, but nobody searched for whatever the term is I came up with in my head because I didn't know any better. So that's super important. Is it better to have a plan? So like, at some point, solopreneurs are probably working at a company or something like that. And is it better to make a plan and then just hop, or like do it on the side for a little bit, or wait until you get laid off in the next round of crazy layoffs and then do it? I mean, I see a lot of people actually do the last one where, they get laid off and now all of a sudden they're an entrepreneur, or they're trying at least. But certainly a lot of times they don't have much of a runway, right? Because they can't find a job because of the market or whatnot.
Christoph, I'm going to choose option D, all of the above. I see people successfully make the leap to being self-employed in all three of those scenarios. So it really depends on your own personal situation, right? So a lot of people, I would say the safest way is not to wait for the layoff, which is nice to have that financial cushion. But the safest way would be to position yourself as an expert while you're still in your full-time job. So you can do this by tweaking your LinkedIn profile, by doing podcasts, publishing articles, doing a blog, but you position yourself as the expert of the services that you want to be hired for when you step out on your own. And you can start building momentum and being perceived as that expert before you quit your full-time corporate job. And that way you've got some momentum before you actually cut the cord. Now, if that cord cutting comes because of a layoff, that's even better, but you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait for a layoff. You can start creating the space to be perceived as an expert before you leave your corporate job. I think that's the safest way.
I think it depends too where you work. I mean, some companies, they seem to be allergic to people positioning themselves as experts, and every company I've worked for, they always enjoyed it that, I positioned myself as the expert, because they always also got clients because of that. They saw my content and whatnot. But I also know some companies, they're not big fans of that, but you can do it way more subtle than the way I do it, right? I'm just kind of out there talking, and whatever comes to mind. Now, how do you decide where to put your time to promote yourself? So, for example, you obviously have a podcast strategy, or you're on my show, you're on other people's show. But how do you decide a podcast strategy is the way to go? Why wouldn't like a blog be better? Or why wouldn't it be better just to run ads on LinkedIn to people that need your help? Do you know what I mean? Or maybe you do all those, of all the above. But how do you decide where to put your time?
Now, for most solopreneurs, the reason I'm doing this podcast with you and podcasts in general is because of the book, right? I want to get the word out about the book, because for less than $20, people can figure out if this is the path for them and the 6 keys to success if it is. Okay. So that's the reason I'm doing a podcast tour. But for the thousands of solopreneurs that I've coached over the years, most people get their work through referrals. So their time is better well spent in creating trusting relationships with people. And so that means networking, having virtual coffees, having lunches with people, going to events, and building trust relationships based on trust. And that's how they get most of their business. So if you were going to figure out what your strategy is for gaining clients, there's a whole couple chapters in the book about how to do this. But the most successful solopreneurs that I know get all of their business through referrals. And that's because they constantly nourish and grow their network. So nobody's going to hire a solopreneur without first having a conversation. So everything that you do should drive people into having a conversation with you.
It's very interesting. So let's talk about that for a second. They have to have a conversation with you. Now, does it depend on what they do or what they sell? Or, I mean, is it, so are solopreneurs, is that a different phrase for a consultant, for an expert, for somebody that helps you? Do they create the little widgets? Who do you typically think about when you talk about that?
Yes, typically solopreneurs are knowledge workers who are selling a service or expertise, not making widgets and selling gadgets. There's tend to be higher priced and more strategic than, let's say, your freelancers that are going to create a jingle, right? You can find freelancers on platforms like Upwork and Fiverr, but you're not going to hire somebody to lead your corporate transformation on Upwork or Fiverr. So typically solopreneurs are independent consultants, executive coaches, financial planners, people who are selling a service based on their expertise.
Yeah, it's actually, I mean, you certainly have to talk to somebody, look at testimonials, but I look at people's digital presence, right? If they don't have a digital presence, and I'm like, oh, well, I don't know. Like, there's nothing I can find. There's no videos. I mean, you can Google my name and like there's pages and pages and pages of podcasts and articles. And you know what I mean? Like if somebody can't learn about me by Googling me, and seeing what other people have said, what I have written about, what I'm talking about, I'm like, they didn't try. That's my opinion. So there is like a level of, you have to have some digital presence, right? Because even though officially the referrals come in, but you might get people, they see you on this podcast and then they forget about the podcast and then they see you somewhere else. And then they post something or they see a connection, and that connection might say, oh yeah, I've read the book. It's awesome. Liz is awesome. Reach out to her. And that's a referral. And it is a referral, last touch attribution, but all those other channels certainly had an impact.
You're entirely correct in that a digital presence is important. I think that people get intimidated by that phrase, digital presence. I mean, really what you need to have is a very strong LinkedIn profile and a simple website. That's usually enough to build credibility and show that you're a professional in what you do. There's a whole chapter in the book on how to optimize your LinkedIn profile for solopreneurship, because there's a distinct difference between a LinkedIn profile of a corporate employee and a solopreneur. And there's probably at least a dozen things that you can do to make that difference. Fundamentally, it's about turning your LinkedIn profile into a brochure and not less of a biography. So it's not about what you've done in the past. It's about how you serve your clients now and what problems that you solve. And there's lots of tricks on LinkedIn to do that. I always refer to your LinkedIn profile as a storefront window. So if you were a merchant in New York and you were selling high-end fashion, you would put your best merchandise on the mannequins in the window. And that's how you need to think of your LinkedIn profile. And it needs to lead people has to build your credibility and leave people a trail of breadcrumbs to draw them into your store, which is really a one-on-one conversation.
Yeah, you got to get people in, talking to you, connecting with you. And I think that's actually one way that I like to also build connections on LinkedIn. What I do is when people that I would sell to, I don't really sell too much, but you know what I mean? Like the people I would work with, they, if they're on somebody's podcast, I will reach out to them and I will literally say, I listened to this episode, I want to connect and whatever. And I'd say nothing else ever unless there's something to say, right? So I guess that is bring value. So the value I'm bringing to them is reassuring them or making sure they know that their podcast was pretty awesome. And I don't make up stuff. It wasn't awesome. I wouldn't say that. Or like when people get positions, they get promoted or something, and I'm not connected. I will send them a message and connect and say, congratulations on the promotion, and usually they just say back, thank you. But now we know each other, right? So if at some point they need my services, now they know who I am, and it's not really a hard sell. Have you seen things like that work, or is that?
Yes, absolutely. And that's what I mean by constantly growing that leads to that. And idea to stop people and say, oh, I heard you on this podcast. I'm very when you said this. The trick is then to have a system or something so that you can follow up 6 months or 9 months, whatever the pace is, develop more credibility with that person. I have a personal story of once connected because we were interested, and it took a year. Eventually, he reached out to me and he said, I need a contact chart transformation that can help with that. It was a 400.
I think we lost her there for a second, but let's see if I can get her back on here. I'm pretty sure she said $400,000, not $400, but we will see. Liz, are you back with us?
I think I am. I don't know what happened. I didn't touch anything.
I think you just got disconnected for a second. It happens. That's what happens on live TV. So $400,000, right? Not $400 contract.
No, it led to it took 5 years of constant messaging back and forths and nourishing that relationship, and it resulted in a $400,000 contract.
That's fantastic. I mean, I've seen similar things too. You know, you connected forever and ever, and then all of a sudden they need help with something that you can offer. How do you, so once you get going, how do you prioritize what to do? And this is like one thing I hear a lot when people get started. You know, they focus on one thing or two things, and then like, oh, how about your marketing? And they're like, oh, we're too busy doing this other thing. Or one of my pet peeves is whether they're solopreneurs or agencies or anybody, and their website is horrible. And I'm like, and I'm going to hire you. I'm going to hire you, Christoph, for helping me with my podcast. But you don't even podcast yourself. Like, your podcast hasn't been updated in 4 years. So what's the priorities when you get started? Where should you focus?
Yes, it's easy to get overwhelmed for sure. Actually, I have an asynchronous class called Getting Started as a Solopreneur. It's only $89. And the easiest way to find that is to go to picanetwork.org/getting started. And that takes you through all the steps to get started. A lot of people think the first thing to do is to set up their corporate entity, and that's not even one of the first things. So there are definitely, it's easy to get overwhelmed when you're starting out, and I would follow the checklist that's part of that course so that you're not overwhelmed. Once you get going, though, this is how, for years, how I structured my priorities. One, it was serve existing clients, because it's easier to keep a client happy that you already have than to get a new one. And then the next one is, do I have any clients in the pipeline? What can I do to get these people over the edge? And then the third would be prospecting. What do I need to do for outreach and business development, or to gain visibility? Or maybe I need to publish another blog or go speak at a conference. What can I do to grow my network and strengthen relationships? That would be number 3. On a more micro strategy, on a day-to-day basis, before I get out of bed every morning, I think of the top 3 things I want to get done that day. It can be something big, like finally publish this big email campaign, or it could be something simple like, oh, I need to remember to make that dentist appointment. Doesn't matter what the 3 things are. But as long as I can accomplish those 3 things, I feel like I've gotten something done that day. And that's how I keep myself from getting overwhelmed or stressed out. Just 3 things. No more than that, because I can't hold more than that in my brain. This is not about adding things to your to-do list. It's just get 3 things done every day, and you'll just slowly build momentum and make progress and keep from stressing out.
So my version of that is I put stuff literally in my calendar. And the other day, it was kind of interesting. I started the day off with like a couple of meetings, and then I had like 4 hours of stuff I had to get done in there. And then I had another meeting. And before the first meeting, somebody messaged me and asked me something, and I responded, and I said, oh, I'm off to Meeting Central for the day. But what I actually didn't realize is that like 4 hours of that, all those hours, that they weren't even meetings, but they looked like meetings. So, you know, I kind of just freed up my time because everybody thought I was in a meeting, and I was in meetings, but I wasn't actually lying. But when I looked at it, so blocking the time, I think, is super important. Overestimating how long it takes, because there's always interruptions. There's always something going on. Like, you know, the internet might go out for a second and you got to do this or whatever. Great tips. Everybody check out the book. Let's see if I can point the right way when I'm facing the wrong way. Succeeding as a Solopreneur, that is available on Amazon. And if you're watching on Amazon, I see people are clicking along. That's awesome to see. It's on fire. That's the emoji I get on my little Amazon studio here. So click, 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 buy, read. And who should reach out to you? And I mean, who do you work with? Like, how else do people connect?
The easiest way, my last name's hard to spell, Liz Steblay is hard to spell, Succeeding as a Solopreneur is hard to spell. So I've created a simple landing page for all things related to me and my organization and my coaching and mentorship and the book, everything. And it's 6keys.info. Not .com, because that's very expensive, and I'm all about keeping expenses low. So 6keys.info, and from there, you can link to me on LinkedIn, get the audiobook, whatever, like find out more about my educational organization. That's the easiest way, 6keys.info.
Check that out, and we're out.
Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review the Business Storytelling Show on your favorite podcast platform, and subscribe so you